Hello and welcome back to another lesson in Algebra 1 Credit 7. Today we'll be going over factoring. Before we go over that, we're going to go over what is a GCF. I try to be funny and say what GCF, but we're going to go over what that is and how do we use it in factoring. So GCF stands for Greatest Common Factor. And this could be a number, as you can see here. So it could be 1, it can be -7, it could be a negative number, it could be a positive number, and just another negative number. There's so many things it can be. It can also be a variable, such as x, or -y, or any other letters. It could also be a variable and an exponent, such as m to the third. Anything to like a higher power. It could even be a -n squared, another power. Another thing it could be is it could actually be a binomial. And that would be actually a series of terms. There's a number and there's a number and a letter or a variable. There's another example. So it's pretty much the biggest number or variable or binomial that the terms share. I could actually divide out. So let's actually see a few examples of this. So I'm going to show you how to factor out a number, a variable and an exponent, a binomial today, before we even go into more complicated factoring. So let's say I had 12x plus 3. What factor, what number or multiple, say multiple, you know that goes and divides into 12 and 3? 3. All right, I can divide out a 3 out of 12. So what would 3 goes into 12 how many times? You're right, 4x. How about how many times does 3 go into 3? Once, you're right. And that's how I can factor out that 3 out of here. How about a variable? What variables do these two terms share? Y. So we're going to divide out a y. If I take out a y, that'll cancel out, and this will turn into y to the first power. I'm left with 2y. I divide out a y here, that just divides out, because anything divided by itself is just 1. So I'll be left over with a 3. Why don't we see on the next one what variable and exponent we could divide out in the next one? Oh, what do they have in common? Well, I know they have a g in common. How many g's can I divide out from each of these? G to the fourth, right? Yeah, g to the fourth. I can actually divide out a g to the fourth here. All right, so that'll be gone, and I'll be left with 2 here. If I divide a g to the fourth here, well, let's see. So that would be 5g to the second power, and this would be, well, this will just divide out, so I'm left with -7. Let's try the next one. What binomial do these two share? All right, x to the fourth. I'll lower this down a little bit. All right, x to the fourth. So if I divide out an x to the fourth here, or x plus 4, I should say, it'll divide out. I'll be left with 9x. If I divide out an x plus 4 here, I'll be left with -4. Let's just do a couple problems just so you can get the hang of it. Like, as always, just if you want to pause me and try some of them on your own, please do so. All right, so let's deal with this one. What is the GCF for this one? Now, this one's a little tricky. If you don't know your times tables too well, you might want to brush up on those. But here we go. So 18V, take away 27. What's the largest multiple you can think of that can be divided out? So our GCF is going to be a number. Let's see. There's some possibilities. We could probably take out a 3. We could probably take out a 9. I don't know if 18 we could divide out, but let's try one of these 3. Which is the largest number? 3 or 9? 9. We'll factor it out, divide out a 9. So if I divide this by 9, and that by 9, what will I get here? 2V. If I divide out a 9 here, what will I get there? -3. And if you don't know your times tables, you might want to brush up on those. Let's try another one. So what am I going to factor out here? A number, a variable, and an exponent, or a binomial? A number. So in this case, will it be -2 or -4? Now I say negative because they both share a negative. But which is the largest number I could take out? -4. So let's go ahead and divide that out. All right. If I divide by -4, what do I get here? A 4K. If I divide out a -4 here, what would I get there? Remember, I'm dividing. +3. Let's try another one. How about here? Is it a number, a variable, and an exponent, or a binomial? A number. Which is the greatest common factor? 1 or 5? 5. Now, I didn't take out a negative out of both of these just because they both didn't share a negative. So let's go ahead and factor that out. 5. Go ahead and divide out a 5 from here. What would that be? -3m. Divide out a 5 from here. What would that be? Good. You're getting somewhat the hang of this. Let's try another one. Ooh. What is the GCF here? What variable do they have in common? You have a variable. But is it x or x squared? What's the max number of x's I could divide out without taking more than I need from each one? X. Now, a lot of students would want to be tempted to say x squared because you're like, oh, that's the highest one. But remember, this one only has one x to divide out. So if I did use this, wouldn't have enough to divide out. So let's see. Oh, and the reason, if you had picked x squared, that would only work for the first term. Yeah, I thought of everything. All right, so x, we'll divide that out. If I divide out that out of there, I'll be left with 1x, or -8x, I should say. If I divide an x out of here, that'll kind of cancel out, and that would be +3. Try another one. So what do they have in common? Well, I know they have a variable in common, but again, what's the highest exponent I can take out? R to the 5th or R second? Or R to the 2nd power? R to the 2nd power. And the reason for that is you have to be able to factor it out of both terms. If you had picked R to the 5th, it would only work for the 2nd term. So let's go ahead and factor that out. R squared. If I divide R squared out of here, that cancels. I'm left with 11. If I divide out R squared here, That cancels, and that becomes 3. That's 2r to the third power. Let's try another one. What variable do they have in common here? W or WR to the third? W. Again, the reason why is because if we have W to the third power, that would only work for the second term. So let's factor it out. If I divided W out of here, that's 2. If I divided W out of here, that'll cancel. I'm left with negative 7W to the second power. All right, let's keep moving through these. Like I always said, just pause me and try a problem out on your own. You can always check to see if you got the right answer. And if you ever have any questions, you can always ask your teacher and your tutors. All right, let's try this one. Do they have any numbers in common or just variables? And if so, a variable and an exponent. And which one do you think we should choose? H to the fourth or H to the seventh? H to the fourth. So we're going to factor that out. Again, reasoning for that is if we had picked H to the seventh, that would only work for the first term. Let's factor that out. So H to the fourth, that cancels, that becomes to the third. All right, and if I divide out H to the fourth here, then I'll have that, plus 13. How about this one? What do they share? Well, I don't share a variable. I don't see, this doesn't have a J. But they do share kind of a number. 1 or a negative 1? Negative 1. So I'm going to factor that out. If I divide by a negative 1, what would that be? Good. If I divide out a negative 1, what would that be? Great. Factoring out a negative changed the sign. Do you notice that? Let's try another one. Now this one might seem like, well, there's no letter that they have in common. I don't really see a multiple that they have in common, but they do have a GCF, believe it or not. It is a number, 1 or negative 1. Well, this has a negative and that doesn't, so let's try just 1. Factor it out, 1. Now 1 goes into 6 how many times? 6 times. And 1 goes into negative 7? Negative 7 times. Now notice nothing really changed, but the GCF is 1. All right, we're going to wrap this up here. This last one, we'll skip one actually. Skip 1, 2. Let's try this one, binomial. All right, what do they have in common? Well, I kind of just gave it away, binomial. So I'm actually going to take out x minus 2. If I divide that out, I'll be left over with 7. And if I divide this out, I'll be left over with 9x. All right. If you have any questions, please just ask your tutors and teachers. Go into Learning Center. But hopefully this was enough to help you with your next assignment. And as always, happy problem solving.